Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. It is now Monday night, July 29th, 2024. We started putting the dates in just because it's been so many years that saying July 29th, at some point is going to coordinate with some other Monday in one of the past years. So welcome. And let me get that mute button on. Okay. If you haven't muted yourself, I'm just going to put everybody on mute. Okay. Well, here we are for another episode. And tonight's guest is Dr. Brenna Hicks from Tampa Bay, Florida. So we're actually in the same time zone, which doesn't always happen, which means that it's 9 o'clock for you too.
It
It's
is.
it's late at night, but you look fresh as early morning. So
Probably not.
okay, so this will be really really fun. Tonight's topic that we're going to discuss is the topic of child-centered therapy or child-centered play therapy, or we'll find out. And what's interesting about Brenna is that she's focusing predominantly on the preteen age. Oh, I think it's, what is it, 4 or 5 to 13, 14.
3 to 14.
So we call those tweens, right? I think starting at around age 5, our kids today are considered tweens or something, somewhere thereabout. And it's an interesting population. I was talking to Brenna a little bit before the show and, learning about how the preteen population has a sort of different language than when we're engaging with teenagers and certainly with adults. And so that piqued my curiosity. Admittedly, I myself have worked with children in the past. My target population right now is adults and families. I do a lot of family work and individual with adult, but I have found over my years of working, I did a lot of what we have over here in New Jersey. There's a program for what's called in-community counseling. So it's more or less working with children who are like sort of at somewhat of a higher level of care, need a higher level of care in their home or community environment, which lent itself to a lot of interesting, I guess you would say, preview or sneak peek into their uh, family life and home life and community life, which is something that we often don't get to see in the therapy room when we're working with a child one-on-one.
Right.
And there's a whole lot more to say about this. Ever since we've been introduced to the book Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. Not sure if you're familiar with that,
Mhm.
but anyone working with kids probably is. And there's a discussion that has to sort of be addressed about working with kids individually versus working with children in a from a more family oriented place. And I think the advantage that we might have over Abigail Schreier is that we are clinicians and we have a sort of different perspective on working with children and its efficacy and whether it's even possible. Because I do believe very strongly, as she asserts, that doing family work, whether it's working exclusively with parents or working in the context of family dynamics, can be very powerful and helpful. We want to empower parents. And I think that we'd be remiss if we don't acknowledge that there is a lot of work for individual child work also. And I hope that tonight you'll give us a little bit of context as to when that might be more applicable. Certainly in a case where the parents are abusers or something like that, and we can't necessarily bring them into the room, or where there was an incident that goes way beyond what parents can deal with. That certainly would be the place for individual therapy for children. And the question becomes, how exactly we engage with them in the most effective way. And I hope you'll, share a little bit about how we can do that for those of us who don't know. And for those of us who've been involved with kids and working in a more child-centered way, you'd be able to hopefully tweak some things and share some insight. So Brenna, can you just, before we get started, can you share a little bit about who you are? I know that you have a podcast called the Play Therapy Podcast for clinicians. That means that if you are working with children, you're a clinician, you can access that podcast. It's not for parents and it's not for children, it's for clinicians. And you also run the Kid Counselor Center out in Tampa Bay. But tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're not a social worker, you're a mental health counselor. What's your background and how did you get into this world of working with children and child-centered therapy.
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me on. This is so exciting for me. This is one of my favorite parts of my professional life is just hanging out with other clinicians and training and talking and doing all things related to therapy. So I really appreciate the invitation.
Ditto.
But let me give you a little backstory on me. It's actually a really interesting story, God's sense of humor, I guess. So I went to undergrad at a private Christian school, and unbeknownst to me, my undergrad's in psychology, but it was very clearly a counseling psychology program, but it was not termed as such. So my exposure to psychology was very much a counseling psychology exposure, but I didn't have any sense of that until I went to grad school. So because I loved psychology so much in undergrad, I pursued my PhD in psychology at the University of South Florida, and I made it one semester in, and I kept looking at everyone in the class with me, and I kept going, when are we going to start talking about working with people? When are we going to start talking about actually having sessions and communicating, and what does that look like? And with a whole bunch of conversations, under my belt at some point, someone said to me, you must have had a counseling psychology undergrad. You need to look into the counseling side of
Mm,
the
mm,
coursework. And that revolutionized my world because I fully was committed to being a psychologist. I thought that was where I was going. So actually left the psychology program, went to the master's in clinical mental health counseling, got my master's in that. And then shortly thereafter, I was exposed to play therapy, which I'll get into in a moment. So going into grad school, I realized counseling was more my bent, really wanted to work with the geriatric population. And my mom was a medical social worker, and I had been exposed to assisted living facilities and nursing homes and hospice care. And I just loved the elderly. And I thought, oh my gosh, what an honor to share their end of life with them and hear their stories and help them in their, later days. I think that would be so fulfilling. And so I'm in the graduate program with all of my sights set on the geriatric population. And one of my professors keeps referencing play therapy in passing, in regular coursework, not related to play therapy at all. And so one day after class, I walked up to her and I said, what is this play therapy thing you keep talking about? And she was like, I'm so glad you asked. And from that point forward, I joke with all of my podcast listeners and my coaching participants and everything. I joke all the time that child-centered play therapy finds you, not the other way around.
mm.
And I truly believe that I was in the right place at the right time and it found me. And so she said, you need to do the graduate certificate in play therapy. You need to pursue this. You need to work with kids. You'll never look back. And my paradigm shifted so greatly in an instant. The first glimpse of child-centered play therapy that I had, it was like you don't know what you don't know, but you've always needed what you didn't know you needed. And everything just clicked. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been missing my whole life. And it was just so exciting to feel the passion and the investment and the love for this approach. So I was in whole hog from day one of the graduate certificate program. And I opened a private practice shortly thereafter. I worked many years until my son was born. And then I became a stay-at-home mom. During that time that I was staying home with him, I went back and got my PhD and then reopened my practice when he was in first grade. And then the practice expanded, and now we have a group practice. All of us are child-centered play therapists. We specialize only in children 3 to 14, and the entire center is, just wholly into the play therapy space. And that has been a really incredible thing to train up other clinicians and watch them just fall in love with the child-centered model as well. So it was a very interesting path to get there, but something that I have never regretted or looked back with any sense of remorse. It's just been a really, really incredible career to know that you get to work with children for a living. And I've had quite a few kids over the years, as I'm playing with them in a play therapy session, say, so this is like your job? And I'm like, oh, you're wondering about what I do for my job. So like you like play with kids, like this is your job. You play with kids.
It's
And
terrible. It's terribly guilt. Sometimes we feel terribly
well,
guilt-ridden to actually
so
enjoy your job, right?
and I have actually been humored by the fact, and one of the kids actually said to me, I feel so bad for you. You just have to sit and play with kids all day. And I was like, you should not feel bad for me, son. I love my job. So it was really a very cool turn of events because not at all in multiple rounds where I thought I would be headed, but something that I absolutely love.
Yeah, that's very fun. I'm going to share an anecdote with you, but I did want to mention like your passion and excitement about this, comes through straight through the screen. We can feel it, and it's always so refreshing to be able to talk to somebody who, after doing this for so many years, is still so excited, and like dripping with passion about the work. I know that a lot will come through, and will benefit us just seeing that. But I like to share an anecdote that some people appreciate, which is when I was a first year intern in social work intern. I did my first year internship at a nursing home, and I had been there for a half a year or so, learning about whatever we do in nursing homes. And this there was one day I'm walking down the hallway and I meet this doctor who is a foot doctor. And I was surprised to see him because I had known him growing up back in Brooklyn, and here I am in some random nursing home in New Jersey, and he's doing his rounds on the floor, and I'm like, Dr. T, what are you doing here? And he says to me, "What are you doing here?" So I said, "Oh, I'm a social work intern, and I'm doing my first year internship at the nursing home." And he's in the room of this, very old woman who's completely senile, and he's holding her pussy foot, and he's, pricking it with a needle and squeezing out the pus. And he goes, "Social work, what a horrible job." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, you're gonna sit and listen to people's problems all day." And I took one look at him and the foot that's in his hand with pus oozing out of it, and I'm like, Okay, whose job is the horrible job, right?" So
Right.
it's like what when you love what you do, you just love it, and it just makes the most sense,
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what you had mentioned about dreaming of geriatrics and then moving over to kids. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be a lot of similarities between geriatric population and the child population. There's a certain letdown of the guard that geriatrics seem to have. The stereotypically blunt or frank old man or old woman who just says it as it is.
A
And we
filter.
our egos seem to protect us, only between a beginning of adulthood till I don't know when that mark is, 65 or 70 or whatever it is. But we sort of there must be many uh, areas of overlap that you can work with children that pertains to adults, to geriatrics as well. Do you find that to be the case? Is that why maybe the two things felt good to you?
I've actually never considered the connection there. I'll share my story of how I made the decision to switch from geriatrics to kids in just a moment, but really, I think that when we think about the whole life cycle, there's always that sense of everything comes full circle, right?
That's right.
So
That's
in
right.
your infancy, in your early childhood, you depend on others, you need people to care and love and protect and keep you safe and all of those things. And you have to trust your caregivers to do right by you. And, they help you become what you become. And then you have independence, and then it starts to go the other direction again, where you need to trust people and they caregive for you and they help you and they assist you and they take care of you. So absolutely, I believe that on both ends of the life cycle, there's so much similarity. Interestingly, though, when I was in grad school, not only was I exposed to play therapy, which obviously was a huge paradigm shift, but there was a parallel discovery as well. I was substitute teaching because the schedule was very easy to accommodate my class schedule. So I could work early morning and then go to class at night. And, you got paid by the day. So it really worked out. I could just block days, whatever. So I was substitute teaching. And every single time that I went into a classroom, you have unjaded eyes, you have a fresh perspective, you have no idea what you're in for. All of the kids are on the same, plane for you. And the child in each classroom that had been branded, labeled, and pigeonholed as the bad kid, I didn't even need to spend more than a couple minutes in the room before I started getting those messages from everyone in the room. Oh, he gets in trouble every day. Oh, she goes to the office every single day. She's gotten written up so many times. She has more referrals than you can count. He's always the one that crawls under the table and doesn't do any of the work. And all I saw with fresh eyes was sadness and anger and misunderstanding and pain. And I just remember feeling so shocked and so sad for these kids. And I thought, they don't have a chance.
Mm,
This is self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. They've been labeled and branded, and when everyone expects you to behave a certain way, you have to follow suit.
mm,
It's looking glass self, right? Like you can't figure out who you are. You have no idea of a self-concept if
mhm,
everyone is always telling you that you're this one thing, even though you don't agree or you don't want to be that one thing.
mhm,
And so I went about interacting with these kids totally differently. And I had no training in working with kids at that time, but I remember getting down on my knees, eye to eye with these kids going, so you know that you would probably get sent to the office for what just happened if it wasn't me in this room, right? Yeah. Okay. I know that you're capable of more than that. And I know that for the rest of the day, you can choose to do the things that you're supposed to do. So I'm going to give you another chance. Can you please go sit down?
mm,
And I watched it.
mm,
I didn't even know what I was doing. I just knew that this kid
mhm.
shouldn't be sent to the office. And I was like, oh my gosh, why do I want to work with the elderly that at that point have maybe carried decades of pain,
That's
decades of hurt that was
you can
never
impact
addressed?
when you can impact these kids.
When I can start before it gets to that point, maybe they don't need help when they're old if they get help when they're young. And it absolutely transformed my entire career path from that moment forward.
But you're making such an interesting point, which is your sense of empathy towards their sense of dejection was really what spoke to you and touched you. And you said, I can feel their dejection, and why perpetuate their dejection if I can change something and do it differently? And I think that in the therapy room, that's so crucial because what we have to know as therapists, whether we're working with children or adults, is that whatever reenactments they're expecting, so whatever reenactments they try on us, if we respond differently than those who had responded to them earlier or prior, then they have a fighting chance to get somewhere.
Right.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
really, I mean, the child-centered model is predicated on Rogers' theory, right? So we have the three core conditions. And then the be with attitudes are the way that we can, as child-centered play therapists, we conceptualize the core conditions that Rogers posited as I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I delight in you.
Mhm,
So no matter what goes on, no matter what your attitude is, no matter what your behavior is, no matter whether you expect a response or you expect no response, or you are content or you're malcontent, it doesn't matter what happens in that playroom with that child. I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I delight in you. And they don't experience that anywhere else. Even parents who do the best they can for their children, there's always conditions, there's always terms, there's always agenda, sometimes out of necessity and sometimes out of ignorance, but no child experiences that kind of relationship and that kind of environment until it's provided for them in a play therapy playroom. And that's the beauty of them having an opportunity to respond differently because they're in a new relationship and a new environment that they've never been in before. And it allows them to really self-actualize. Let's go back to
mhm.
Rogers again. I mean, no one wants to stay stuck in maladaptive patterns of behavior, and everyone will work toward becoming a better version of themselves with the time, the tools, and the opportunity. So the same concept of that substitute teaching moment in the classroom absolutely carries over into a child-centered playroom.
And really being able to stick with that. And I was going to ask you, why do you think it is that that population, this child population, let's call it, before adolescence, why is it that so many therapists are scared to go near that population? So many therapists will say, oh, I don't work with kids, or I don't go near kids, or what's that about?
Well, almost exclusively graduate school trains you to work with adults, number one. So unless you happen to be in a university with a play therapy program, for example, your coursework, your curriculum, your theory, your practice, your practicum, your internship, it's all adults. So it's kind of this, scary unknown of, oh my, I have no idea what's going on with this whole like under 13 thing.
Mhm,
And I also think because therapy, traditional therapy anyway, is a talk-based model, it's a cognitively based model, it's an intellectual model, it's a reasoning-based model, a rationalizing-based model. I mean, there's all of these things that therapy has as components, and children possess none of those capacities. So when you want to engage with a child, you think, well, I should ask them questions. What do we learn in elementary school? To get information, you ask who, what, when, where, how, why. So we sit down with a child and we're like, let's figure stuff out. Let's have these discussions. And they give you one word answers, or I don't know, or they disengage, or they stare at the floor. They're not being defiant. They're not being disrespectful. They're not doing anything. They're uncomfortable because they're not cognitive beings.
Mm.
Asking them to come into their heads to have dialogue with you and process things with you and analyze things with you and think through things, it's causing an internal war. They live in their emotions. They are emotionally driven. They are feeling beings. So we have the unique capacity as adults to meet them in their feelings. Ironically, they do not have the capacity to meet us in our cognitions, but we expect them to come talk to us like rational, reasonable adults, and developmentally, they are incapable of doing so.
So,
When
so we're expecting them to take care of our needs in a sense by going where we are familiar and comfortable as adults.
right, and what we've been trained to do, because we have all of these theoretical models that help us interact with conversational adults, right? So we can use the magic wand technique and we can use the empty chair technique. I mean, we've been trained to do all of these things that require cognitive processing.
Mhm.
So when we sit down in front of a child and they don't talk and they don't readily share things and they don't want to engage and they don't answer questions, we feel like our hands are tied because the only thing we know to do is think through the process. And the play therapy model says, meet them where they are, which is an experiential, feelings-based place. We have the capacity to do that. So let's go in their direction, and then we'll know everything we need to know about them. But that's scary for clinicians that have never been in a playroom, have never let a child lead a play session, have never, I mean, that's foreign concepts to most therapists. So of course they're going to shy away from it. And I think it's a fear of incompetence and failure more than anything else. I don't think most therapists are vehemently opposed to working with kids. I think they feel very ill-equipped to do so. And so the avoidance is not, I don't like kids or I don't want to help kids. It's, I don't know how to be effective in
Hmm.
working with children.
Excellent answer, and probably very, very true. Let's take a moment just to do some housekeeping. For those of you who are here who can turn on your videos, we love to see faces. Please turn on your videos. Thank you, Elliot and Rachel, and everybody else who can, please do. And if you can't, we understand. It's late at night for many of you, and you're not in the best of shape. But thank you, Simcha Lex. And that's number one. Number two is, if you have a question for the kid counselor, Brenna Hicks, please,
Or Brenna.
or Brenna, either one, right? Please, or me for that matter, please use the reactions tab on the bottom of your screen and click the raise hand button so we can call you. And I do want to remind everybody that we're sponsored tonight by OKclarity.com and by OfficeStreamline.com. OKclarity.com is a website that will promote your work for you, that will host your website for therapists, coaches, and promote what you do, whether it's trainings, whether it's counseling, whether it's groups. They will take care of all the back end work. All you have to do is sign up and create an account with them. OKclarity.com, and Office Streamline is your virtual secretary, so that if you want to save a couple of hours a week so that you can get in more clinical hours a week, which is what we therapists love to do, besides Simcha Lex, who loves to do paperwork, right? Okay, maybe not. Then sign up for Office Streamline. They'll take care of all the secretary paperwork, and they'll take care of returning phone calls for you, scheduling, and all that good stuff that we like to try to stay away from so that we can stay as clinically geared as possible. So take a look at our sponsors. Brenna, so, okay, kids don't work, the takeaway is that kids don't work on the same cognitive processing level as adults. And so those of us who've tried to sit down with kids and treat them in the way that we have successfully treated adults are going to run into some dead ends and some frustration. And then we're going to say, oh, I don't work with kids. We'll make some coping response to say, oh, I just don't work with that population. So you're telling us that there is an alternative. Okay. We know that many people who work with kids play in therapy, but playing in therapy is not necessarily the equivalent as play therapy, right? Playing is just playing. So Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what's the alternative? We're working with kids, and you're saying we have to work with them on from an emotional based place, and we can't use that same cognitive lingo that we use with adults, even to bring them to an emotional place. We might use cognitive lingo, even if we're very analytic and dynamic, and we work from a cognitive place. So what can we do instead? What is it that child-centered therapy or child-centered play therapy has to offer, and how do we go about understanding that?
Okay, thanks for asking. So I think I have to start my answer with, ideally, you want a fully equipped playroom to do a full child-centered play session. And obviously that's not practical for everyone. It's not something that everyone can have access to or create for themselves. So just know that in its truest sense, you're going to have a fully equipped playroom with carefully chosen and selected toys, 3 categories of toys recommended and represented. And then, you have the environment, which creates the ability for the child to do the work that they need to do. In lieu of that, many therapists will do a sort of a modification. So typically what happens is, as long as you have age appropriate toys and or games and or activities, kids will use what they have access to. So let me tell a really quick story. So I spent quite a bit of time in Central and South America doing mission work when I was younger. And I spent a lot of time in Honduras. That was where I spent most of my time. And this was the most rural mountain villages, the poorest of the poor. I mean, Honduras is a poor country anyway. And then, these people did not have running water. They didn't have electricity. It was very rural, very remote, very poor. And I remember I was young. I was in, college and grad school at the time. And I remember just watching children find things to play with. They didn't have toys. They didn't have the money to purchase toys. Their families, worked just to put food on the table. But they would take the old metal from a discarded bike and they would find sticks and they would barefoot run down the streets and they would keep the sticks balancing the tire as it was rolling down the road. And then they would switch who got to play with it. And I watched the creativity and the compulsion that children have to play, even when you don't have access to things that you would play with if you had access to them. So the beauty of the play therapy model is kids will use what they have. So even if you don't have a fully equipped playroom, if you have only a handful of toys and you only have a handful of games and you only have a handful of activities, kids will use what they have access to.
So you
So
mean
the
they'll take an Othello game and take the Othello pieces and not necessarily play Othello, but roll them around and see if so they can spin them and how long they can keep them going or whatever else. Do you see that as a function of innovation and creativity or boredom and trying to keep themselves busy or what? What is that?
often it's their creative, imaginative play. It's really fascinating to watch how children will challenge themselves, how they will invent creative ways to use existing things, which again, the child-centered model says the child leads and the therapist follows. So just because I have Candyland in my room, for example, just because I have Connect Four in my room, just because I have Don't Spill the Beans in my room, there is a prescribed way to play that game according to the instructions that come with the game. Instructions get thrown out in a child-centered play therapy room. And if the child knows how to play that game and they want to play it the correct way, which there's nothing correct in a child-centered playroom, but that's why I'm air quoting. If they want to play it by the instruction manual, they will tell you how to play it according to how they've played it before. But what more often than not happens is a child looks at the pieces and looks at what is in the box and looks at different ways and then goes, okay. And they come up with this really inventive, imaginative, creative way to play a game. Why? Because they're wired to play. And play is how kids make sense of their worlds. The world is scary, the world is big, the world is confusing, the world is overwhelming. There's all of these things that are constantly swimming around in children's brains about life and what they know of it. And play is their way to ground themselves. Play is their way to resolve conflict and tension and confusion. And so they will often very, very creatively use things in really special ways to meet a need. Often they don't want to play a game for collaborative play. Often they don't want to play a game for competitive nature, sometimes they want to stack the dice because they're working on their self-concept and their self-esteem. And it becomes self-challenging play to see how many of the pieces they can stack before it falls over. So they use what they have to do the play that they need to do. So when you want to sit down and do play therapy with a child, for example, you have to understand, number one, the child will lead where the child needs to go. So you don't have to have an agenda, directives, prescriptives. Let's play a game together. Let's do this together. You don't have to prompt anything. If you give children freedom, they will naturally do what they need to do because they know what they need to do to heal. That's the whole premise of the child-centered model. So not only do we not need to give them any kind of prompt, we also give them the space to do what they need to do. And through that process, they will let us know everything that they're working with. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a consultation with parents after I've seen the child for 5 play sessions. I always meet with parents. And I sit down and I say, so tell me what's going on at bedtime. There has to be something going on at bedtime. Oh my gosh, we've been trying to get her to sleep in her own bed and it's a fight every single night. Tell me what's going on with like taking a bath. There has to be something going on. Oh my gosh, that's the greatest fight of the night. And they're like, how do you know that? Did she tell you that? No, she played it out. And the beauty of this is that if we trust children to work on the things that they need to work on, they don't need to tell us anything. They show us. It all comes out when we give them the freedom and the space to just do what they need to do. And there are studies that show that when a child's hands are actively engaged doing anything, it does not matter what it is. They can throw a ball repetitively against the wall and catch it. They can make something with Play-Doh. They can spin a dice on a table. They can stack blocks. They can doodle on a piece of paper with a pen. It does not matter what is going on, but if their hands are actively engaged, they feel more comfortable, their inhibitions are reduced, and they're able to process things with someone else in the room to a deeper degree. So expecting a child to sit still on a couch and talk or do a worksheet or a CBT intervention or whatever it is that we think kids are capable of doing, it flies in the face of their developmental capacity. So if we just say, I'm going to give you this hour to do whatever you want to do. There's all kinds of things in here that you can play with. You can play with most of the toys in most of the ways that you want to. Watch where they'll take you. Watch what they will reveal to you. Watch what they will play out. You get it all handed to you on a platter, but try to have a conversation with them. So tell me what's going on at school. Why are you getting kicked out of school every day? I don't know. You get nowhere. So it's really fascinating to see how it unfolds when you give kids the space to do what they do, which is play.
Amazing. I want to go, come back into the therapy room a little bit more. And I have just like a series of bullet points in my head that I'm wondering about. They're going to be predicated on the idea of, or the question of, how do children heal by just playing? And here's like, I would say 4 questions, 4 bullet points that I'd love for you to share on. I'm actually going to put them in the chat box so you can follow them. The first one is, there's obviously a lot that you can observe in watching children play. I mean, there's a lot you can observe in engaging with adults too, in the nonverbal, behavior and affect. But there's a lot that's spoken about. I always think about DIBS when I think about, child-centered therapy.
My favorite book ever.
Okay, so we all know DIBS, right? He's our friend, with a happy ending, right? And uh, uh tell us a little bit about the role of the observation. You already touched on it when you said you spoke to the mother and you asked what's going on at this time, what's going on at that time. There's obviously a lot that you're observing in the way they play. And then what about commenting? I know that a lot of child-centered play therapy just observes and then verbalizes the observation. Is there anything more to commenting that helps further the process and move the process along? Is there any room for challenging them? So, I guess a crude example would be, the child plays Connect 4 with you and then starts to cheat and, make the rules. I'm sure that never happened to you. You're laughing, so it probably never
So often it happens.
Okay, they obviously they change the rules as it goes in order to ensure that they win. So let's just say, right, as a simple, crude example, is there ever room to challenge the child at some point and say, what would it be like if I would get ahead of you, or if I would win, or what are you afraid of, or do you just want to roll along with it? And then the last one was healing, which I already mentioned. How does the healing process take place just in that safe space?
Okay, gosh, put your seatbelts on.
Let's
Okay,
do it.
so first, yes, so much of the child-centered model is observing because we are in the following role, not the leading role. And this is one of the things that I talk to my coaching participants about all the time. So many therapists as a whole, but then specifically play therapists have gotten caught up in this eclecticism. And if you are my podcast listener, you know my vehement opposition to being eclectic in this field. So I truly believe that the pressure and the burden and the stress and the weight is all on our shoulders when we are constantly trying to create change for our clients. Oh, you're angry. We need to talk about this. Oh, you're sad. We need to do this. Oh, I should use this technique with this person. Oh, and I mean, all of that weight and responsibility and pressure solely rests on us to have the magic answer, the magic technique, the magic skill that we have to teach them. And the child-centered model says, I trust the child, I trust the process, and I trust self-actualization. And therefore, I just sit back and I let it unfold. And trusting that is hard because we want to intervene and we want to interject and we want to guide and we want to do all these things. We want to rescue kids from their pain sometimes. We want to give them suggestions to solve the problem for them. But at its truest form, child-centeredness says kids know what they're struggling with. They will naturally work on those and they will become better versions of themselves. But they have to have the relationship that is safe enough that creates the space, and they have to have the environment that is free enough that creates the process. So you put those two things together and kids will naturally just work on stuff. So speaking of observation, we can sit back and just observe what's happening. I don't have to dictate. I don't have to direct. I don't have to provide an agenda. I don't have to move in a certain direction. I don't have to set the pace. I just sit back and I say, you can play with all the toys in most of the ways that you want. And then they do what they want to do. And so our comments, as a result of that, we have 3 reflective responses, which are kind of the most basic skills used in a child-centered playroom. So we either track the child's behavior, which means we just say what we see them doing. Oh, you grabbed that, and now you're going to stack those up. And notice that I didn't give labels to that because we don't give labels to what kids use until they tell us what they are. So I could say you grabbed the jump rope, but maybe they want to use that as a lasso. So until they tell me that it's a jump rope, we say you grabbed that. So that was why I used vague language there. But we say what they're doing. That's tracking behavior. We can also reflect their content. So if they share something,
I'm sorry, one second. Brenna, sorry. Tracking their behavior, tell us about the importance and what is it actually doing when you track their behavior? Because you said that it's all about the relationship and the space that we create for them. So tracking their behavior is not simply tracking their behavior. What's the depth to it?
the depth is that if we're silent, a child feels watched. And a child feels that we're just sitting there and they're playing, being observed. So the more verbally engaged we are, the more they know that we are active participants, even if we have not been physically invited to play. We only join in a child's play when we've been asked,
Hmm.
but we will be 100% verbally engaged while they are playing so that they know that it is a collaborative nature in the playroom and that we are engaged with them while they are playing, whether we've been asked to participate or not. So as we're tracking behavior, they're often doing something not looking at us. So the only way they know that we're present and attuned and engaged and all of our attention is focused on them is we have to share with them what we notice is happening.
So this
Because
this this sounds like it would be the equivalent of reflective listening when engaging with an adult.
yes.
Beautiful.
So, and that's actually a really helpful segue. Thank you. So when they share something with us verbally, we reflect their content. So if they say, oh my gosh, today when I was at school, I kicked the soccer ball and I got a goal and my whole team was so excited. Okay, so they share stuff that happens in their lives with us in the playroom. And then it's our job to reflectively listen and basically give them a really short summary of what they shared with us. And that's true even when they're narrating their play. So sometimes they'll say, okay, I'm going to see how many times I can hit the ball with this racket before it falls on the ground. That's very play-based commentary. Sometimes they just share with you what's going on in their lives or outside of the playroom. In either case, reflection of content is give them a very short phrase back to help them feel heard and understood. So you got to make a goal at PE today, or you have a plan for hitting the ball with the racket. Okay, again, it's to show attunement, investment, attention, all the focus is on the child. Then the final and maybe more complicated of the three options is to reflect their feeling. So anytime that they express any kind of emotion through their words, through their behaviors, or through their facial expressions, we work to identify what that is and share with them what they're expressing to us. So as they're telling the story of making the goal in soccer, we could say, you're so proud that you scored, because we could see the pride, right? When they say that they're going to see how many times they can hit the ball, you're determined. So every time they are expressing an emotion, we acknowledge that to them. The weight of that is that they develop an emotional vocabulary. They develop an emotional IQ, because it's a two-part process that many adults have not mastered. This is not something we're born with. This is something we work on. So if you don't accurately identify your feelings, number one, and then if you don't effectively communicate what those feelings are, we get stuck in a lack of emotional maturity, even as adults. So children feel somatically everything that we do. They get butterflies in their stomach, they get lumps in their throats, they get sweaty palms, they get racing hearts, they get all of those things. And they just think that it, quote, feels funny. So when they feel nervous in the playroom and we say, you're worried about that. Oh, okay. So when I feel this weird sensation in my stomach,
That's
now
called
I
worried.
know Brenna said it's
Right.
worried.
But
So now they have an accurate identification of the feeling. And then in the future, when I feel that again, I have the word for it. Now I can effectively communicate it to someone so that my needs are met. Because if kids don't have an emotional vocabulary, they will behaviorally demonstrate their discomfort and their lack of emotional vocabulary. Once they have the vocabulary, they will communicate it verbally. That's the monumental shift between maladaptive behavior and effective communication. Once kids develop an emotional IQ, they don't have to show you how they feel, they can tell you how they feel. Throwing themselves on the ground in the middle of a grocery store is a
is
lack of an emotional
a
vocabulary.
form of communication playing
100%.
itself out.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but I would add to what you're saying that besides just the emotional vocabulary that they develop in which they can now express themselves functionally, when you reflect back to them using language and describing the emotions that they're experiencing, I believe that you're also normalizing the experience. If they're feeling worried, whether they do or don't recognize that the experience they're having is one that's called worried. But when you say, oh, you're feeling really worried now because whatever they expressed, they now have seen from you that it makes sense for them to feel worried for
Absolutely.
whatever it is that they're feeling worried. And that normalizes them and takes away, it removes what I call the shame of feeling worried. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm feeling worried? But Brenna's saying, oh, you feel worried because that happened. So now I know that it's normal and okay to feel worried.
So not only does it remove the shame or confusion or unknown, which is very difficult for children, but it also communicates very clearly all feelings are valid.
Yes,
And kids often learn very quickly that only certain feelings
that
are
all
valid.
feelings are not valid, right?
Yes. And so, look, your feelings are always valid. Sometimes your behavior is unacceptable, but your feelings are always valid. That's extremely powerful for a child to know.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Okay, so let me continue. I only got through two. So
Yeah, so
the,
wait, so
and
just
Ellen, I saw
repeat,
your question,
repeat what those two, what are the first two? What were they called?
observations and oh, the first two of the reflective responses. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm
So,
sorry, you said all three of the responses?
well, I meant three of your four questions,
I
but
get it, but you said I think you said there's
three
like,
reflective
what
responses.
were they?
So they are tracking behavior,
Right?
reflecting content, and reflecting feelings.
Got it.
So the easiest way to remember those, if you track behavior, you say what you see. If you reflect content, you say what they say. And if you reflect feelings, you say what they feel.
Okay.
So let's move on to, and Helen, I will answer your question as soon as I'm done with his question. So the third is challenging them. Okay, so this is the bane of a child-centered play therapist's existence in the playroom, because we believe that we should impart wisdom, teach lessons, help them understand the way the world works. And the reality is that that is not adherent to the child-centered model. So I'm going to follow your scenario. So you're playing Connect Four and the child cheats, the child gives themselves an advantage, the child always makes sure that they have the upper hand so they can win. The approach to that is not to challenge them, it's to neutrally observe and comment. Getting back to your first two questions, you observe neutrally and you comment neutrally on what is happening. So here's what that looks like. So, oh, you're giving yourself an advantage. Or you went 3 times in a row so that you could win.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is stated with unconditional acceptance. I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I delight in you. Frankly, I don't care. My competitive streak, woo, that gets under my skin sometimes. I'm like, how dare you make sure that I lose every single time we play this game? I've had to curb my competitive drive in the playroom for sure. But the reality is the child needs to have the advantage because their self-esteem is so low. The child needs to have the power because they need so much control because their life is in chaos all the time. They need to make sure that they have the upper hand because they don't know that they can handle failure because it's a reflection of themselves. This is a means to an end. This is not about cheating. When a child is structuring a game to win, it is not because they, quote, want to win. It's because it's driven by an underlying issue that they are trying to work on. So by neutrally acknowledging it, factually commenting on it, oh, you chose to go 3 times in a row so that you could get further ahead of me. Here's what happens. You stay neutral, you observe, you comment. You stay neutral, you observe, you comment. And over time, because of the self-actualization process, because children know right and wrong, because children have a conscience, because children know that it is not fair to cheat. You don't have to tell kids they shouldn't cheat. They know they shouldn't cheat.
And because they know that they don't have to be in control of you after a period of time when they finally learn that.
So over time, what happens is they start going, when you say, oh, you chose to move 3 times so you could get ahead, but now you get to go 3 times. And all of a sudden, they're still not, it's a progression, right? So there's baby steps of how we fix this for kids. But what will happen is all of a sudden they cheat and then they let you cheat, which is still not where they need to go, but they have at least evened the playing field a little bit. And then the next time they'll say, actually, you get to move 4 times. So then now all of a sudden, for the first time, my piece is ahead of their piece. They might eventually end up going back to they're in the lead again, right? But they at least let me have a moment where I was in front of them. And then eventually, even though they win and they win and they win and they win, out of the blue one day, I will either actually win, like they didn't tip the game at all and I just truly won, or they intentionally had me win. Why? Because the pendulum shifted. This is a very, very important concept in a child-centered playroom. Kids feel that they get stuck on one side of the pendulum. So if they feel stuck that they never have any control, they're going to take as much control as they can in the playroom. If they feel paralyzed in fear, they're going to have to swing that all the way to the other side with fear-facing play. If they are aggressive and they are always aggressive, they're going to have to put themselves in a position where they're at the mercy of someone else's anger. The pendulum will always swing from one side where they've been stuck all the way to the opposite. Neither end of an extreme is healthy ever. And so they have to know what it feels like to go to both sides. And they eventually come back and they realize that sometimes I want to win and sometimes it's okay if I don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to have power and sometimes I don't need to have power. Sometimes I need to be aggressive and sometimes I need to be more passive. Balanced center is where kids always land, but they have to experience both extremes before they can make sense of what health looks like. Because what happens is when I feel like I never have any control, so the pendulum is stuck in powerlessness. The antidote to a child, because of their emotional center, is, well, I should have all the power then. But what they don't realize is they don't like either. I can't always have control and I can't never have control. I don't like the feeling of either one of these
Uh-huh.
extremes. So by experiencing both and being given the freedom in the playroom and the relationship that's safe enough to go through that process, they heal themselves because they go, I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to cheat. I don't want to make people feel bad. I don't want to be angry at people. I don't want to be aggressive. All of a sudden, they start self regulating. They start self correcting because they don't need someone to tell them how to do it. They need to experience what they need to do to figure it out for themselves.
So beautiful. That's a concept of, their regulation will come when they feel accepted and when they feel calm and when they feel whole. And then many of these things you're saying will just fall into place. I'm wondering if you ever find room to encourage them to cheat. So if you see the child needs to cheat, would you then insist, hey, you only went twice, and I know that it's important for you to be way ahead of me, so I want you to go a third time before it's my turn. Would you find that to accelerate the acceptance process?
I don't know. I've never done it because it's not adherent to the child-centered model. So let
In
me
what
give
way is
you
it
an
not
example.
adherent to the child-centered model?
So we don't ever want to direct a child's thoughts, behaviors, or actions in the playroom. So for me to say you should go again, that's my agenda rather than the child's agenda. So I would never want to suggest that if the child didn't already choose to do so, because it can redirect where they were going. It can take the play in a different direction. It can create a reaction that they weren't prepared to handle. So we very much stay in the back seat and let the
Mhm.
child drive. But here's what we would say. We would enlarge the meaning of what was happening. And this only happens later in the process. Kids can't handle this early on. So we have to be careful with when we introduce this skill. But once we've been working with a child for a longer period of time and they can handle deeper processing, we enlarge the meaning of what's going on. So in that scenario, it's really important to you that you win. It must be scary to think about losing. So while we're not accelerating the process by an agenda or a directive, we're helping them bridge the gap between what they are thinking about that they don't know they're thinking about, and then it connects to what they're feeling and experiencing in that moment. Because again, they're going to experience and feel whatever it is. But by our commentary and by our enlargement of the meaning of what's happening, that serves as the bridge so that now, okay, I at least have a cognitive awareness of what's going on. There are words associated with what my experience and feelings are right now. And that will often accelerate the process once you're able to enlarge what's happening for a child.
Excellent. Excellent. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Shlomo's asking that often he finds that when a child cheats, they insist that he also cheat, just not as much as them. How would you're smiling, you know something about this.
Oh gosh, cheating in a playroom is like, the standard thing. So this is just what I deal with almost every day. When a child is cheating, they already feel guilty. They already feel ashamed. They already know it's wrong. They already feel that they should be handling it differently. We don't ever have to let them know that. They're very fully aware of that. So often their need to win, their need to not fail, their need to have power, their need for whatever, again, means to an end, right? So whatever's going on, they have to cheat. That's that drive that they have. But because they know it's wrong, if they can get you to cheat at the same time, it normalizes it and it takes the negativity off of them. Because if we're both cheating, it can't be that bad. Because I mean, if we're both doing it, then you can't get mad at me and blame me because you're doing it too. So that is actually maladaptive coping that kids will often use because they understand
This
inherently
is
that
a
what they're
very,
doing is
this is a very, very old phenomenon. It's the phenomenon of Adam and Eve, right? Where Eve ate from the fruit and she said, "Here, can you cheat with me too?" So this didn't happen.
and then he blamed her. So,
This
right? I mean, it's like pass the buck, right?
yes.
So if I can get someone else to be complicit in this, then I can't really be held accountable and be that wrong because it's not fully my fault. And it takes away the shame and the guilt and all of those feelings to a degree until the child is able to not have that need to cheat anymore. And then it will all level itself out. And then Helen, should
Yes.
parents try and do all this with their children? Yes, yes, yes. So the coaching program that is designed to teach parents to use these principles with their children is called Child-Parent Relationship Training. And it is a 10-week course. It is child-centered play therapy based, and it actually gives parents all of the skills that are used in a child-centered playroom to be used as part of their parenting approach at home. And when we work with parents and families in our center, we are almost always using skills from that curriculum to equip parents to use these skills with their children at home. That's very, very important, because the power struggles that we see in the playrooms, the behavior issues that we see in the playrooms, everything that's going on with kids, parents are facing the exact same scenario, and without being equipped to meet children where they are, meet them in their emotions and their feelings, parents get the same outcome that therapists do when they try to engage with their kids. You know, we over talk to our kids, we over rationalize with our kids, we over reason with our kids. And if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it, because kids aren't verbal beings. And it's really, really difficult for a parent even to engage effectively without understanding how these work and how effective they are. And I know it was already mentioned, I do a clinical podcast, which is the Play Therapy podcast. I also have a parenting podcast. So if you want to point parents in that direction, or if you are parents yourselves and you want to listen to it, it's the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast. That actually was started before the clinician podcast. And that is using child-centered play therapy principles as a parenting skill set.
But Brenna, I'm just thinking, parents have different challenges than therapists. They're in charge of disciplining their kids. They're responsible for very immediate outcomes, and they can't always be in that same space for the same reason that parents can't be their children's therapists. I mean,
Sure.
does that get in the way of them being able to execute?
So it becomes a way of being with your child.
Ah,
And we talk about that a lot when we are talking about a child-centered playroom. It's not it's not a set of skills as much as it is a way of being. And when parents really start to understand the philosophies, the tenets, the principles that undergird this kind of interacting with their children, it is no longer, I'm using this skill in this moment for this reason. It becomes an entire approach to interacting with their children. And so early on, does it feel like, gosh, I don't know how to do this in this moment? Yes, of course. But over time, with practice and with integration of the child-centered models into a parenting tool set, all of a sudden, the entire premise of the relationship shifts from, I have to use this skill in this moment, and it becomes, I'm going to be with my child in this
in
new
this
way. I'm
way.
going to interact with
Beautiful.
them in a new way. I'm going to communicate with them in a new way. I'm going to be with them in a new way.
Excellent. And I'm sure that so many parents have this inborn, naturally as the natural chemical reaction or hormonal reaction between them and their little infants. And then as the children grow up and become more verbal and more complicated, it probably begins to die down, and it's harder to be that way with the child. Okay, can we
Right.
take, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the concepts that I've posited and shared with a lot of parents over the course of, the 20 years or so that I've been doing this is, you're stuck in a limited set of options. I've termed it the parenting prison. So you typically either parent the way you were parented because that's what you know, and that's just a standard reaction. Or if you vehemently opposed the way you were parented, or you absolutely hated it, or you think it was dysfunctional or it was toxic or whatever, then you say, I'm never going to parent that way. And then you have to grasp at straws to come up with a new parenting approach because everything you know is no longer at your disposal. And in either scenario, you're stuck in a limited set of options because
Exactly.
you either are only using what you knew, which are not necessarily helpful and effective, or you don't really have any idea what you're doing. And it's like, let me just throw this and see if it sticks. And next time I'll try something else. And so you're always kind of waiting for that magic solution. And that's why I believe that the child-centered framework provides such a system for parents, because it's very formulaic, it's very laid out, there's a very intentional way that you handle things. And once you grasp that and you have that as your foundation, you feel equipped to handle any scenario that comes up because, again, it becomes your way of being.
Beautiful. Okay, let's take a question from Shulam. Go ahead, Shulam.
A quick question about the training. Does it include the parents practicing with their child, or is it more like in isolation without
No,
their
it
child
is.
there?
So the structure is you, as the clinician, are training the parents directly without the child present. So you provide them with the skills, and then they go home and do 30-minute play sessions with their children to practice the skill that they've learned. So not only does the child get the benefit of playtime with their parent, which we know is healing, then the parent gets the opportunity to very clearly and be focused for that 30 minutes on implementing the new skill. And again, it's forging the relationship all along the way. So the structure is essentially therapist trains parent, parent plays with child, everyone benefits. Oh, and to speak to that a little bit further, the parents record their play sessions and then the therapist reviews the play sessions with them and gives them feedback about the use of their skills.
Yeah, so that's good because a lot of times, parents might not, might fail on certain things and want some guidance, so that's great.
Right.
Or misrepresent. And then the
Sure. And I
therapist
mean,
can actually,
it's child-centered play therapy is its own language. And so, it really feels often to parents like they are practicing and learning a new language. And so sometimes you need someone to say, okay, let's tweak that. Let's just change that. Let's use a different word there. That was an effective use of a skill. Here's an opportunity. You could have done something differently. And that feedback is an integral piece of that training program.
Mm. Yeah, right. And again, I feel like when kids are pre-verbal, in a sense, it's so much easier because you can roll on the floor with them and giggle, and the communication is all going on in the nonverbal. And then I guess we assume as they become more verbal that they can understand things differently and better, which to some degree they can, but we then neglect to continue to perpetuate what really speaks to them best.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't have said that better. That was, yes.
Michael, Simcha, go ahead. Your question.
Hi, so I'm doing a lot of teletherapy these days and often like across states with SIPAC. So don't really have opportunity to have a physical playroom. Any online techniques that might be useful or playful attitude that might be?
Gosh, that's a tricky question. So we actually did child-centered play therapy virtually during the Florida COVID shutdown. We had about 6 weeks where we weren't able to be in person. So we tried it and we really just found that it was not very effective. It's really difficult to have that relationship and connection and engagement over a screen. And unfortunately, kids will take liberty with that. So they would carry the tablet around and they would like show you different rooms. And I mean, at that point, it's not even therapy anymore. So we've found that actually really challenging. And we have found that it's really, really a huge hindrance for us. So, I mean, obviously, the older the child, I do every once in a while out of necessity, something happens, I will see teenagers during, a virtual session, but they are able to sit down and have a conversation. So it changes the dynamic. I would say 13 and younger, you'd be really hard pressed to make that work with younger kids.
Thank you.
I think a lot of us just felt very validated, right? And Michael, it looks like you're out in Alaska, so that's a lot of virtual therapy probably.
Stay warm.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or comments to share on this? I found this to be so enlightening for me and actually empowering because I do come across children that I work with or even less verbal teenagers or less verbal adults, if I could say. And there's probably a lot to be said. I mean, is play therapy in this sense ever done with adults who are either highly traumatized or for whatever reason not very verbal?
Play therapy has been proven effective with every age across the entire lifespan. You can do it with infants, you can do it with 100-year-old people, you can do it with TBI, you can do it with aprasia, aphasia, you name it. If there is any kind of issue, cognitive delays, congenital defects, it's been proven across the board, universally effective, every age, every reason. It's incredible. Why? Because it's based on the relationship.
Mhm.
It's a way of being. And you trust that the client is going to work on the things that the client needs to work on. And so you just provide the space for them to do so. And it doesn't matter their age, their issues, whether they have trauma, whether they have ACEs, I mean, it doesn't, you can fill in the blank of what's gone on in their lives. It's very, very difficult to be cognitive. Think about Maslow's hierarchy. It's very difficult for your brain to attend to cognitive functions when you are overwhelmed with emotion. So it doesn't matter what's going on in your life, how old you are, whatever. Sometimes you just need someone to meet you where you are in your feelings and just let the relationship be enough to start the healing process.
Fascinating.
And I mean, child-centered play therapy works with everyone for every reason. It's really the most incredible thing, because sometimes we joke that we watch stuff happen and we marvel at it, even though we know it works, but we watch it unfold and we're like, oh my word, I have no idea how that just happened, but it happened. Because people self-actualize. I mean, we have to trust God created us in a way where we know what we need to do and we can heal. Like the body heals itself, or the body repairs itself. I mean, so do our emotions, so do our synapses if we have brain damage. I mean, things repair and heal by God's design. And I really believe that we watch that unfold when we give clients the space to just feel and experience what they need to. They will naturally move in that direction.
Brenna,
So I've worked with a lot of nonverbal individuals. I've worked with selectively mute individuals. I've worked with people that are unable to talk because of congenital issues. And there is always, absolute on purpose, there is always an expectation that people have that once you start talking, fill in the blank, right? Like, if we can just get you to talk, there's always an agenda, there's always a plan, there's always a push, there's always an outcome that everyone in the world is wanting. And I'm sure that's true for this young man too. And in the child-centered play therapy room, you can choose to talk or you can choose not to talk. You can choose to engage, you can choose not to engage, you can choose to play, you can choose not to play, you can choose to stare at the wall, you can choose to do it. There's freedom in saying, I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I delight in you. And the end goal is not for you to talk to me. The end goal is for you to do the work that you need to do, whatever that looks like. Is it reduction of anxiety? Probably. Is it recovery from some kind of trauma? Probably. Is it relational in nature? Almost 100%. I mean, I could go to the undergirdings of what I think is going on issue-wise, but will those things naturally be addressed in a child-centered playroom? Yes. And what will inevitably happen? As those heal, the talking will naturally become a part of the healing process. But when I work with children that don't speak, I say to parents all the time, the end goal is that not that the child is going to talk to me. That is not what we're working toward, because talking is just the surface level thing. There's all of this deeper stuff. That's putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. If the child said words to me and didn't address the crippling anxiety that is causing them not to talk, what good do the
we didn't
words?
really help him, right?
We have to get to the root issue. And that's why child-centered play therapy works. And with him, I think it would be ideal.
Right.
Okay, let's take a question from Rachel.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this workshop, because it really validates so much of what I do with the children I see in my practice. As a matter of fact, when you say that it's so self-healing for them, sometimes parents will come to me and say, wow, my kids are so much better, or you did this and you did that. And I'm sort of wondering, what in the world did I do? It was just the atmosphere, the relationship that happens in the room that allows the child to be so much, and I'm putting it in quotes, better in the outside world. But I'm hearing you describe a very almost, it's not passive, because you did speak about the process that you use in the room. But let's go back to the cheating for a second. How do you ever make a comment on the cheating? Besides for, oh, you wanted to get ahead of me, let's say, or you needed to go 3 times. I sometimes put myself in another child's shoe. Let's say I was another child playing with this child. We've gone down to their level. How would that other child, I want to put them in that social challenge of, how does it feel for the other to cheat with another child? Would they accept you that way? I'm not finding the right words, but maybe you're getting the idea of what I'm saying. It's not quite as it's accepting, but also helping them shift? Do you ever help them shift into another behavior that would be more, quote, acceptable out there?
Oh, Rachel, it's so hard not to, but no. So here's why. Because if we push, if we correct, if we try to put them in someone else's shoes, if we give them a concept of like, hey, how would someone else feel? It's pulling them into their heads. They have to think about it.
Yeah, I don't want to say, I don't say anything like that, you know, but I sort of, you don't engage them in conversation at all?
Well, you engage about what's happening in the playroom, but
Right.
you don't engage about bigger picture unless you're going to enlarge the meaning behind what they're doing. So it's really scary for you to think about not winning, or you really would feel bad if you weren't able to win this game. That would be an enlargement of why they're cheating. We would have definitely do that. But to do anything else is going to be directive and prescriptive. And again, it's going to pull them up into their heads. And kids don't function in their heads, they function in their hearts. That immediately puts them in an internal battle, and they're no longer able to be present in their play, and healing comes in their play. So if we ever engage in a way that is cognitively based,
Okay.
all of a sudden now they have to come up into their heads and they're like, wait a minute, I was doing this over here. And it's very, very hindering to the play therapy process if that happens.
I'm also hearing you say that it raises resistance. If
Oh,
you,
100%.
you know, if you're trying to tell the child, this is how someone else is going to feel, and however as gentle a way as you say, you convey that, right? So you're sort of lecturing them on the social disadvantage of their behavior, but it's also invalidating the need to function in the way that they are. And
Right.
so you're going to potentially raise their resistance and shut them off. That's what I hear you say.
Yeah, one follow-up comment to that is, one of the phrases that we live by as child-centered play therapists is, what do I need to say or do in this moment that will most preserve the relationship or do the least harm?
Right.
And so in any given moment, even though I want to rescue, I want to solve the problem, I want to help, I want to teach a lesson, whatever it is that my adult brain wants to do because I feel like it's right, I often will say to myself, anything I do other than just stay present and engaged with child-centered tenets is going to fracture the relationship. And my one and only goal is to preserve that relationship at all costs. So the only way to do that is to just let the child lead. And whatever the child does, they need to do it. They don't do things flippantly. There's always a purpose behind behavior and what they're doing in the playroom. So eventually they will naturally self-correct. They will naturally stop cheating, and they will naturally realize that their friends don't like it. I don't have to get them there. They'll get themselves there.
Yeah, definitely a big mistake that most of us, I was going to say we all, but we all make with our children and our clients when we're working with kids is that excitement or compulsion to correct it. You know, like Brenna said, it's very hard not to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't talking necessarily about correcting them. But I hear what you're saying, and that is a basis for what I do, that unconditional regard that we talk about all the time in the play. But if a child comes from a home, I mean, if I would give an example, you know, one child came to me, he doesn't follow rules in school. He just doesn't follow rules in school. And the parents just couldn't understand. He doesn't follow rules at home. He doesn't follow rules in school. He doesn't know what a rule is. So I don't know. This kid was very cute and very bright. And he was sitting on the couch and he was actually just talking to me or something. And I just looked at him and I said, so what's a rule? And he goes, I don't know. I said, well, can you give me an example of a rule? And he looked, this was before he had all the games available to him. He was a talker. And he said to me, I said, well, you know, let's take a simple rule like let's say you're driving a car, your father's driving a car, and when the light turns red, you stop, and when it's green, you go. And he was just looking at me, and I go, what? And he goes, my father doesn't stop by red lights. So he came from where should he learn the self-correction? That's you know, when you're saying self-actualize, it has to come from somewhere, you know, like I'm not coming across clearly.
No, I do understand what you're saying. And in the playroom, we only set limits when they're needed, but when limits are necessary, we do set limits. They're not rules, if you will, but
Oh,
we do set limits.
okay.
So when a limit is warranted and needed, then a child does actually
Yeah.
learn what a limit looks like and how to choose to comply
Okay.
or not comply with a limit.
Okay.
And so actually, because we didn't get into it, let me just really quickly throw this out. I know we're over time, but I talked about the 3 reflective responses. There are 4 pillars of child-centered play therapy. And
Okay.
so the 4 techniques that we use as kind of the basis upon which all of the child-centered skills lie, it's reflecting feelings,
Mhm.
limit setting, choice giving, and encouragement. So through the choice giving process and through the limit setting process, as children are in play sessions, they naturally are exposed to having the choice and therefore accepting the outcome and therefore having responsibility over said outcome, as well as learning to choose to comply or not comply with limits. But there are consequences to both. There are consequences to choosing to comply with a limit, and there are consequences to choosing to not comply with a limit. So that is actually how they learn to self-regulate and
Okay.
self-control as
Okay.
part of those 4 pillars.
Okay.
Okay. Wow.
That was a big part. Okay.
Yes, but very important to throw in at the last second.
Brenna, this talk was just fabulous, and I really appreciate it. If anybody knows anybody out in Tampa Bay who can use some guidance, whether it's parenting or clinicians working with children, Brenna, definitely the way to go. And I just found this to be so insightful and so passionate that I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. It's getting late, and unfortunately, we got to go. But maybe we'll do a round 2 or something one day.
Sure, yeah, have me back. It's good.
Okay, thank you. Good night. See you
Oh,
all.
bye-bye.
Bye bye.